So Jess, I know that you've been doing a lot of work lately with restorative justice, and it's a topic that I am very excited to learn about. I think that it's very important work that you've been doing, but it is new language in the space of improving organizational culture. So could you please explain to us what restorative justice is?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of misnomers about what it is and isn't, so I really appreciate the ability to talk about it. So it's a social science that talks about the importance of community and relationships and how to rebuild community and relationships when something has gone awry, and how to restore both the community, the relationships to their sort of best place and maybe even better. And it's rooted in indigenous communities where it wasn't an option to say, you did something that harmed this community, you are no longer welcome. They had to really think about, how do we help the community and help the individual, but how do we fix this whole thing and allow this person to stay in our community? So again, practiced for thousands of years by indigenous communities, we're just starting to bring it in to medicine and healthcare now, but it's been used all over. It's been used in the criminal justice system. It's been used in elementary schools and high schools. So we're a little bit late to the game, actually, but I think it's such a valuable resource that we can be using in healthcare.
And I can see so much positive potential in what you described, but in today's rather defensive and reactionary culture, I can also see someone taking the description you just gave and then creating a lot of red herrings, extrapolating. So could you tell me a little bit, maybe we just define it in terms of what it is and what it isn't?
Yeah, I would love to do that. So I think in general, when a conflict happens or when a problem occurs, there's three big ways you can handle it. The first is retributive. And this is like an eye for an eye. This means someone hurt someone, they deserve to be punished, or they deserve to be hurt back. So this is someone commits a criminal offense, they go to jail. That may be necessary, but it doesn't really impact the person who was harmed, or what the underlying harm was, or how the community was harmed by it. But that's one model, retributive. The next is rehabilitative. This is my natural go-to. A attending hurts a trainee, and I think, well, let's get that attending some remediation, right? That to me is like where my mind goes. Like, let's get them some anger management. Let's get them some additional training and make them better at this so they can come back and do great work. That's my mindset. And then, or what I've grown up with and grown into. Now I'm shifting into this idea of restorative practice or restorative justice, where something happens and instead of punishing the person, retributive, or fixing the person, rehabilitative, I now say, what were the real harms? Who were all of the people who were harmed? And what do we need to do to make all those people as whole as possible and to make the community as whole as possible? So this is the first time that instead of just thinking about the perpetrator of an offense, we're actually thinking about not only the victim or the person that's harmed in some way, but we're also thinking about there probably was some effect on the whole community here. And unless we address this as a whole, we're not going to fix it. Let me give you an example of this that a friend shared with me that I thought just really brought this home to me. She was stationed in San Antonio, Texas, at Fort Hood, Texas, when there was a mass shooting at Fort Hood, Texas.
Remember it.
And all of the focus was on the person who committed the offense. And that person should go to jail forever, or that person should suffer the death penalty, or whatever it was. Like, there was all this conversation around how does this person get punished? But there was never any conversation about how have those families been healed? How has the community been healed? Who else aren't we thinking about that was harmed by this? Who was working that day in various places and it triggered old trauma and harms for them, right? Restorative justice asks that we look at all of that and we put it all together. So we think about how do we help the person as best as possible, because often even a perpetrator can be harmed in a situation. How do we help that person? How do we help the community? How do we help individuals that we may not even be thinking of that were truly harmed? And how do we bring them all together to fix it?
And it seems to me like this would really require, while this is essential and this needs to be the model in the future, it probably requires growth from a lot of people who are currently leaders, because it's going to force them to expand their view of who the stakeholders are in every situation, and have to, with the retribution model that you start out with, where it's very simple. I just have one person and I punish that individual. And then you evolve to the next model and it's, okay, we'll take care of what your shortcoming was, and we will get you some sort of training. But just opening up to this whole new expanse of the offender or the offendee, and then the secondary effects, dealing with those, I can see that there may not be resistance, but leaders might really need someone to walk them into this new mindset, because it's really going to require an expanded scope for them.
Yeah, I think it's really true, right? Up front, there's a time commitment required, right? There just is going to be. But there's actually one model that we talk about in restorative justice. There's like tiers of restorative justice. And the first tier is just community building. Just getting to a place where we all know what our values are. We have a shared picture, a shared value, a shared mission that we're all going to work on together. We can talk about it. We can use difficult language together. We share community. We do community building circles. We talk about questions that we don't generally talk about in the work environment. We really get to know what others want. That's tier one. Tier two is what we were just talking about. Now something has happened. How do we fix it with a restorative mindset? How do we think about all the people that can be helped and not harmed? The third tier is actually once someone's been removed from the community for some reason, maybe because they were a perpetrator, but maybe for something else. Maybe they had a child, maybe they had an illness. How do we safely bring them back into our community? Those are the tiers. And they do take work. But if we think about it, often we're not actually fixing the problem by removing one person from community, or from doing rehabilitative measures for one person. Often they can do what they need to do while they're being closely watched, but we haven't actually fixed it. They haven't heard from the person who was harmed how they harmed them and what that really meant and what was taken from them. Whereas I think we can really shift the way people see things and view things and interact with others if they understand how others are experiencing them. And so that's what's allowed with a restorative mindset.
Listening to that, and you talked about what the first tier is, I know that you have done a lot of work currently on the civil discourse, and it seems to me that to even really be effective with tier one, that a lot of organizations should listen to your video on the civil discourse, maybe take one of our workshops and build that skill, because it sounds foundational to actually reaching tier two, tier three, and tier four. And I know that when you are developing your models on how to analyze a problem, that very often you come up with a very intuitive graph or Foursquare. I'm wondering if you have one for the restorative justice model.
Yeah, well, first I want to take a step back, because I think you're right. I think that restorative justice and civil discourse go hand in hand. I'm actually going to argue the opposite of what you said, though. I think the community building of restorative justice has to happen before you can effectively do the civil discourse, as opposed to the other way around. So it is sort of a chicken and egg phenomenon, but we have to be able to communicate. We have to have the relationships to have the civil discourse, I'm going to argue. So just interesting to think about. We can have some more talks about that, too.
I'd love to.
But yeah, my model here is I really think about restorative justice as being this perfect blend of accountability and support, right? So again, if we have all accountability but no support, then everyone's fearful, right? Everyone's too strict. This is sort of what we think of often in the military, right? When folks are just coming in at basic training, it's like all accountability, you're getting yelled at all the time. That's sort of the model we think about. If we're all support, then we end up in this permissive system where no one's really held accountable. In restorative justice, we're asking for a high level of accountability and a high level of support. So in these circles, when we bring folks together, we have a supportive network around them to help solve these problems. We're not asking anyone to do it on their own. We are asking them to own their behaviors and to own how that has affected others and the community, but we're going to help them do it. And we're going to hear how they were harmed potentially by it too and try to fix that. So everyone is getting the support they need. Everyone is accountable for their role in a situation, whatever that may be. And that's how we can obtain that restorative mindset.
I love that foursquare. When you talked about the high accountability and high support quadrant, I think it's a very useful way to express it for people who want to be passionate about restorative justice and want to be effective. It's a good way to look in at your actions and check yourself. Am I only offering one or the other? Am I offering both? If not, what do I need to do to be the effective champion of restorative justice that I want to be? If we were going to work with an organization, if they decided they wanted to improve their ability to implement restorative justice, what might the lecture or the workshop look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it has to start with community building circles. It has to start with a shared understanding on setting the stage for what our community agreements are, how we want to operate together, how we want to get to know each other. And so explaining the ins and outs of what the different types of community building circles are, how they function, what they feel like. Like you have to experience a community building circle to really understand it. You can't just hear about it. So it would absolutely start there. And then we would ask for, in your context, what have been some recent conflicts? How were they handled? How should they have been handled? And how might they be handled under this new model? And I really want to emphasize the point that things don't only have to be one of these three buckets of retributive, rehabilitative, or restorative. You can do both simultaneously. Someone can be sent to jail and you can still do restorative circles with them and the person that they harmed to try to build that relationship back and fix it. Someone can get remediation and you can still do circles, right? So it's not an either or, it's a yes and. How do we make this all work so that everyone can be whole?
I'm just so excited about this concept because I can see leaders in healthcare applying this both inside your healthcare organization and also in your relationship with your community and your stakeholders. Like the return on the investment for getting better at this skill just seems limitless.
Yeah.
And I'm really excited that we might be able to help people do it.
I'm laughing right now inside because one of the first people we taught this to, actually wasn't sure that he really bought into it. But he was also getting remarried and now was going to have a blended family with a bunch of kids. And so he started doing community building circles at home. And pretty quickly it got to the point where one of the kids would say, I think we need a circle. And like all of a sudden he was like bought in and believed it. And so I think you're absolutely right. It does not end. Like communities can do it. Healthcare organizations can do it. Homes can do it. I think this is a really broad concept where when we start to think about how we impact others on a regular basis, like the benefits are endless.
Well, I've really enjoyed this, and I'm sure once I've had time to process a little bit, I'll be back with more questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.